All right. Let's see. Get in the chat window here. Is this the one that Saddam was in directly?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's in there now. Should be.
Hey, so you can come back to the room if you can hear all this. All right.
Okay, everyone, we're going to get started. We had some technical difficulties. Looks like some folks had the wrong link to the meeting. So once again, let me just welcome everyone to our Service Fabric Community Q&A number 39, and let's jump right in.
All right. Let's look at what we got in terms of questions.
I just see one question on, I must be on the right page. Are the various commandlets used by Service Fabric built-in deployment script published in GitHub somewhere?
It's from Whit.
Which from Wit? Pneumatic.
Sorry, what's the?
Are the various commandlets used by built-in Service Fabric deployment script published in GitHub somewhere?
By the built, when you say built-in, what do you mean?
In at least Service Fabric, it's got like the deploy Service Fabric script or something that comes by default when you build a new solution. It seems to be referencing
The one in VS.
Yes, and it seems to be referencing some commandlets that they are not the published PowerShell, Azure Service Fabric commandlets. So I assume they're installed somewhere locally, but instead of figuring out where that is, I was seeing if there's like a GitHub repo of them somewhere.
I think they're all either installed in the as a part of the SDK or the tools, actually, in the case of VS. But they're all just little wrappers around the main actual Service Fabric commandlets.
Sure.
Is there an example of one that you're trying to get a hold of, or what's the?
Yeah. So like specifically, I'm looking to see how y'all handle like the publish upgrade Service Fabric application. I'm essentially just trying to do this in a more custom manner. To I guess install and upgrade a bunch of different applications at the same time. So I guess I'm trying to learn more about how that one works, and like I said, I'm not sure where it is on my computer.
Yeah, I'm not sure where it is on your computer either, but I'll put into the window the VSTS tasks or pipelines now are open source on GitHub, and those are basically exactly the same stuff. So there's 4 sets of tasks in there. The main one is deploy. So if we go look at that thing here,
Yeah.
Right. These have some modules in them that I think provide those little helper scripts. At the end of the day, every single deployment is copy, which you take the package and copy it up to the cluster, register, where Service Fabric digests all the metadata and figures out, validates everything, and then new application.
Sure.
So all of these scripts and helpers are really just wrappers around that stuff. I guess there's connect, right? You have to talk to the cluster.
Sure.
But I think a lot of the things that VS does are just validation and wrappers around that sort of stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I guess what I'm kind of adding on top of that is stuff like I've added more services since the initial deployment, or I've removed services since then. I want to, when the new deployment is published, remove the old services. Can operations like that? I mean, since if I'm removing the service and clearly the application will go on, is that safe to do while it's doing the rolling upgrade for the application itself? Or should I wait for that application upgrade to finish before doing anything with service-specific stuff?
Typically, we would say to wait. If you do the operations while the upgrade is in progress, we'll actually block some of them. For very short amounts of time. Like if you're registering a new service type and doing an upgrade to that service type and creating instances of that service at the same time, right? There's always a question: does it get created in version 1 or version 2? So for those tiny windows of time, we'll block some of those operations. You'll just get asked to retry. So it wouldn't cause any problems. I wouldn't expect it to cause any problems. but you would have to have additional logic to back off and retry and watch for those specific kinds of errors.
Okay.
So the simplest thing to do is to let the upgrade complete and then do any service level stuff so that you know exactly what version of things you're creating.
Okay.
For example, if you were using the services defined in ARM or the default services, that's what they do. The upgrade goes first, and then let's say you removed a default service, that after the upgrade is through is when the delete would happen or the create happens.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of the best practice. Again, it shouldn't cause anything wrong if you don't, but that's what we normally recommend.
Sounds good. Fair enough. Thank you.
No problem.
I guess.
All right, we
Okay,
got
following up one more. I'm digging through at least the upgrade one, and I see, once again it's referring to wait service fabric application upgrade action, which sounds like exactly the sort of thing I'm looking to use.
Mhm.
Where is that? I don't see that one.
I don't know.
in
Let me
either
see if I
this
can find
repo. Yeah. Thank you.
Send me a list of these things, and the other thing we can do is we can get the tools team to see where it is. But like, I know that that's just a poll, right? That there's nothing really special about it. It's get service fabric application upgrade and watch for the completion
Oh,
result.
just watching that value. Okay.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
all it's doing. I mean, again, a lot of these things are just little helper scripts wrapped around the actual service fabric APIs. There's no deep magic in
Okay,
these things that I'm aware of.
Cool. Okay. Well, thank you.
But yes, we should be able to articulate where they come from. So I think if you want to mail me with the ones that you're trying to get a hold of or trying to find, I can involve the tools team or the task pipeline folks, and we can figure out where they're placed, and you can kind of disassemble them from there.
Okay. Could you post your email again?
Sure.
There's a GitHub repo where it kind of, I'm just browsing through the GitHub repo for the built and release pipeline task, and there's a bunch of PS scripts that talks for each of these, and I can just put that link and see.
Yeah, if you can find the ones that.
Yeah, and you might have to just dig through there's a service fabric deploy v1 GitHub repo.
Yeah.
I'll just paste it in the Teams and then.
So we'll go from there.
Yeah, he can go from there, yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Very good. So we got a couple of congratulations on Dapper and
Yeah.
OAM. That's cool.
Yeah.
And Marcin, could you explain how the integration between Repair Manager and SFRP works? Today I've had report from the dev team that during load tests on Service Fabric node, or during load tests, a Service Fabric node failed when CPU reached 87%, and then it failed to auto heal. In the logs, there were failures with connectivity to the repair endpoint in SFRP. I would really love to learn how it works in theory.
I mean, so we don't automatically fail machines. If they failed due to something else, then that was outside of SF. The logs were connected to a repair endpoint, shouldn't have done anything. We don't monitor or alert or blow up the box based on that. It's possible that the resource consumption on the machine caused it to fail its leases, where SF would then kick the machine out of the cluster and bring it back. But I think you might want to look into the actual source of the failure. The Windows event logs, if it was an actual unplanned failure, then that should be there. If it was a lease failure, then those will end up in your Service Fabric logs.
The problem.
But that's about it. It wasn't specifically because of repair. Repair Manager is really a little agent that we inject into the cluster to watch for these Azure maintenance jobs, and then it might initiate other things through the infrastructure service in order to move services around and then move them back or drain the work out of a given machine. So it's the pairing between the infrastructure service and the repair manager. The repair manager, I think, is also used in POA, patch orchestration application, to drive some of those same types of workloads, or similar code is. But yeah, those failures look like a symptom, not the cause. The symptom looks like it's probably the network connectivity itself or something else was wrong.
Okay, so I can so it probably means that during the load something went wrong with network connectivity, then it caused to fail, and the connectivity to the Reaper endpoint in SFRP was broken due to the connectivity errors, because restarting the machine was not helping with node repair, and afterwards I believe they have re-imaged the node, and it took 40 minutes for node to reconnect to the cluster. This is what I've got reported from
Yeah.
the development team.
Yeah, that feels like something either in the load testing consumed the resources and prevented the machine from participating in the cluster, so we kicked it out. But if it's taking that long to respond to Azure infrastructure level commands like reimage, it's possible that there was something genuinely wrong with the machine, and that would cause similar behavior, right? If the the networking software, the VNet stuff is misbehaving in the operating system, that would cause similar symptoms. So maybe I would open if that repair, if you have records of that taking like 40 minutes, you might want to ask Azure Compute, kind of generally, hey, I issued this reboot repave command on my machine and it took a really long time. What gives, and see what you get back from that. But I'd say it feels most like a hardware or software error at the networking or OS layer that then cascaded into all these things.
Okay, so basically, when I should ask also the dev team to repeat the tests, and it should not be reproducible in future.
Yeah, or I would expect it to. If you do the performance test again, it's also possible that the performance test is the root cause. Like, so there's something in the performance test that stresses out the machine gets into a bad spot, the networking goes sideways, you get all these connectivity failures, the lease fails, the machine gets repaved. But it's the fact that you went and did the infrastructure operation to say, hey, repave this box, and that took a very long time. That's pointing to something probably outside of the performance test, unless the performance test was still going on at that time. Maybe it interfered with that operation. But that's kind of what I'm feeling.
Okay, thank you. So if this repeats, I will probably re-raise the ticket and probably share it with you, maybe.
Yeah, that'd be fine.
All right, cool. Okay, we've got interest in Dapr. So what does Dapr mean for the future of Service Fabric? And also, is Dapr going to run on top of Service Fabric, including State Store, PubSub, Actor Model, without using third-party stuff like Redis?
So I think the first thing we want to say is there's a whole presentation tomorrow on Dapr.
Yep.
Where we would request that, if you have interest in Dapr, please show up. And Mark is going to be talking through what the Dapr project is, if you haven't heard of it. Previously in these community Q&As, we talked a little bit about a project called Actions. So if you've heard of Actions as another programming model that we've been kind of working on to kind of bring some of the stateful compute stuff and actor stuff and event-driven architectures together, you can carry that forward. The official project name is Dapr. So you can connect those things in your head. In general, we're really trying to get to a point where we can evolve the programming models independent of the core Service Fabric runtime. So architecturally, it's certainly possible that Dapr could run on top of Service Fabric, just like it could run anywhere else. I don't have a demo of that working today, but it is, I would expect that Service Fabric could be an environment just like any other environment. The whole point of Dapr is that ideally it doesn't know or care where it's running. That's something that we're going to continue to investigate and work on. Of course, we already have lots of programming models inside Service Fabric. So figuring out the relationship between these two things and seeing what people prefer or how things work going forward might be interesting. So there's also an interaction where we have to consider that some of the things that Service Fabric exposes would not necessarily be exposed in Dapr. I wouldn't expect Dapper to have APIs like report load or report fault or some of these other very Service Fabric concepts. Those might end up being implementation details of particular Dapper things that end up in the generic Dapper layer. But we haven't found all those use cases yet at this time. So I think the majority of this stuff will hopefully come through tomorrow in Mark's talk. And I think we'll get you the link to the.
No.
You won't?
No, so.
Okay.
Just something that Matt didn't know. So it's, tomorrow's talk is actually for advisors. It's under NDA, so.
Well, I guess look for the link in Azure Advisors, those of you that
Yeah.
are there.
Perfect.
And
Yes.
I guess apply to Azure Advisors if you want to see it
There you go.
between now and tomorrow. Maybe we can give them instructions for that. But the whole point is that this is attempting to be an architectural separation specifically so that these things can run and operate at different kind of speeds. So, we've had challenges before with Service Fabric where we want to roll out a fix for the programming model or we want to deliver some new functionality, but because it's coupled with and delivered by parts of the Service Fabric runtime, that was hard. We also saw a lot of confusion in between the relationship between actors and actions and functions and a lot of these other things. So hopefully the Dapper project, by being this separate thing, we can start to address some of those concerns and kind of unify some of those requirements. But I wish that Mark was on the call today to help address some of these things, but it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Whit got the link to Dapper. There's also, while we're talking about, recent things that we've announced and their relationship to Service Fabric, there's also OAM, OAM, the Open Application Model. And I think Sudan was on the call and he will probably be most interested in talking to that. I'm going to respond to Adam here real quick. Will SF exist a few years from now? Yeah. That's a little bit out of left field, but sure, we understand. You still have to have a runtime and an environment where all these different models can run. So we think Service Fabric is still positioned pretty well as a place for that. And again, we run, about 40% of the cores of Azure run Service Fabric in some form or another. There's thousands of customers out there. Hopefully you count yourselves among them. So I think that SF has a pretty fine future and we are continuing to invest and improve it. You could think of this as we're really trying to expose and get some of those capabilities out there more broadly. But of course, SF is still a great environment to run those types of programming models and applications. So I wouldn't view this architectural separation as meaning really anything for the core Service Fabric runtime. You still need failover, you still need replication, you still need these sorts of scalable environments. You still need this automatic failover stuff. So just think about it as instead of delivering everything in one big monolithic repo, right? We're learning things and we're being able to experiment with the community in these more open and separate layers. So architecturally, it's kind of a good thing. Hopefully that addresses his question. Let me see. I think dropped the ball on some products that have thousands of customers out there. Yeah, that's happened, and I don't know what to tell you other than that. I don't see it happening in this case. That's not what we're being told. That's not the way that we're moving forward. So if you have those concerns, if you have direct lines to other Azure executives, feel free to ask. But the word on the team is that, Service Fabric is a product that is out there. It is public. It is publicly supported, and it's going to continue to be. And I don't view the architectural separation or taking some of the learnings and models and things that we've done in SF and making them into, separate fully fledged products or platforms or these projects on GitHub really means anything about the future. I view these as separate architectural considerations and good things, right? So that we can evolve those programming models and hopefully get more community involvement broadly on making them better so that everyone benefits. Hopefully that addresses some of the concerns.
Yeah, he said, okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. I mean, if you see me update my LinkedIn, maybe, get nervous, but
I don't see that happening.
yeah, I don't see that happening. And even then, I want to be very clear, there's hundreds of people that work on this thing.
Right.
And we need it to keep Microsoft running. So,
Yes, we do.
it's certainly a niche. It's certainly a product out there that, has not seen huge community adoption, but it costs us basically nothing to keep it up there on GitHub for you and to continue to do releases and release versions of the product, because we have to do that in order to keep Microsoft running. So I think you can be fairly safe and secure. If there are other projects that you would rather use instead, no one is going to twist your arm and say you have to use Service Fabric. So I think a general message and a pattern that we've been seeing with a lot of the work that we've been doing in Service Fabric, going back even to the mesh work, is that the future is serverless. So hopefully in the future, you won't have to pick a particular environment as frequently, and there will be higher level platforms out there and higher level concepts out there, like the open application model, like Dapper, and like some serverless compute environments from Microsoft, where you won't have to be as embedded in a particular runtime in order to get some of these benefits. That's certainly the direction that we're taking stuff. I did mention Dapper. Sadamba, do you want to talk about Ohm for a second? Are you on the call?
Yes, I am. There's actually a question on Ohm that I was going to address from Marcin about what value does Ohm add over top of the existing KS app model. And there's two ways I want to ask that. One is that there's a clear separation between the Ohm specification and the Rudder implementation. So Ohm is a specification that we worked with Alibaba on, and the goal of Ohm is to increase the level of abstraction from container infrastructure concepts to application concepts. And the goal is, that this specification can be taken into any implementation. For example, Kubernetes is one implementation that the spec can be run on, which is what Rudder does. Alibaba just announced last evening their own version of it that's running in Ali Cloud, and we have no idea if that's on Kubernetes or not. And in the future, there might be something on Azure, might be something on other public clouds, and that's the Ohm spec. And then there's the Rudder implementation, which is a layer on top of Kubernetes that kind of adheres to the specification. And our goal with Rudder was twofold. One was we wanted to show users who came to the Ohm specification how you can build an implementation that adheres to the spec. And two, we see Rudder evolving into, on Kubernetes as kind of the de facto app level interaction. If you look at Kubernetes today, even if you look at the app CRD, it's very infrastructure heavy. And we think, and so does Alibaba and a few other partners, that there's room to, increase the level of abstraction when you're defining apps to something that looks like the Ohm spec. So we agree that Rudder on its own on top of Kubernetes is not going to give you a PaaS-like experience because you still have Kubernetes, but it's a step in the right direction, and that's really what we're trying to get at with Rudder.
Okay, one following question. So, are you trying to reuse Kubernetes abstractions in OAM, or are you reinventing all the abstractions?
Yeah, so that's more of a kind of a long-term question on what this thing would look like. So if we were to take the Ohm spec and do something on Azure, then some of these things would have to be first-class citizens in Azure. What that looks like, whether it fits right into the ARM model or whether it's going to be something new, I think we are still working through that.
Because my concern is basically that a lot of applications are now using Kubernetes model, application model, YAML, the manifest model. And what I'm afraid is if the OAM model is too far from the Kubernetes and it reinvents a lot of abstractions, then there is a huge risk that people will be reluctant to adopting the cross-platform option only because it's cross-platform. Yeah. So if this is the only value added, the cross-platform, I'm afraid that a lot of people might be wanting to stay at Kubernetes. So what I was thinking about is my feeling is that OAM should reuse Kubernetes model as much as possible, but So just to reuse, if it's possible from the licensing perspective, or I don't know, I'm not a lawyer, but basically, if it's reuses what is possible, then it would be much easier to adopt and extend this model.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I think that's good advice. Do you mean like, because today, if you look at the OM model, it looks a lot like a Kubernetes spec. So how do you propose that we change it to make it look more like a Kubernetes app model? Our intention with it was to make it, like a lot of the inspiration was driven from actually looking at the Kubernetes app model, and drawing some of what we've done in SF Mesh to it. That's really what the product you're looking at is.
What I'm suggesting or asking, because I haven't got time to go through OAM because I was more into Dapr, to be honest, is that, for example, if you have secrets abstraction, then let's reuse the secret abstraction for Kubernetes whenever it's possible.
I see. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think at least some of the plans that we have with respect to how we were thinking of taking OM into Azure is gonna align with what you're saying.
Awesome. Thank you a lot for answers.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, next question. Fabio has a question about actor events. Okay? What's the question?
Sorry. Hi. Thank you very much for your time, guys.
No problem.
One question I have is, the product we are facing a problem about actor events. So we subscribe to events emitted by an actor. And the way you subscribe is you provide a handler, like a class that will handle those events, right? And the only way that we saw that you can unsubscribe those events is by calling the method unsubscribing, passing the same reference to the method. However, I don't see, if you cannot serialize that class because it has things in the constructor like actor proxy factory, for example, it cannot be serialized. And in the case of a failover, how can you unsubscribe? How can you clean up those subscriptions?
I see. So you're in a situation where after failover, you might not have the information necessary to recreate the specific event. Is that the case?
Exactly. Like I would need to clean up the subscription so I wouldn't have duplicate subscriptions and then resubscribe. But in the case of failover, I might not have that information anymore.
During failover, we automatically resubscribe the event notifications. So that shouldn't be the problem. But the unsubscribe, I see the issue. So just to be clear, during failover, let's say you've subscribed to 3 different sets of events. So you've called subscribe async like 3 times for slightly different sets of things that you want to subscribe to.
Yeah.
Those will be automatically reestablished after failover. So that's not the problem. The unsubscribe call, though, you have to put that same, I think it's like T event or something like that, back in. And so you must have the information necessary to reconstruct that event type. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but if you need to pass, do you need to pass the same reference as you created in the first place, like to subscribe? Wouldn't that be lost? So, for example, if you need to keep it in memory because you cannot serialize it.
Right. I don't believe that it needs to be exactly the same reference, but I also haven't done this a lot with types that can't be serialized in the way that you're describing. So I think this is a good question. If you can send it to me, I can follow up with the actor model, program model folks, and we can figure it out. And maybe, sample code exactly what you're running into.
That would be amazing. Thank you. If you don't mind, would you be able just to paste the email so I can know exactly where to send, please?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll do that.
Just because I want to make sure that I'm looking at exactly the code that you're running into. and we
Yeah,
can,
yeah, definitely,
we
definitely.
can
Thank you.
spot check it. Yeah,
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much.
no problem.
This is another dapper question from Marcin. Marcin, are you okay in holding off until tomorrow to ask this question, or?
Okay, no problem. So,
Fair.
Yeah, I mean,
is this meeting going to be much different from the previous one?
Oh, yeah, you saw the first one. So I think there may be some updated information in this one tomorrow. I'm not 100% sure. I haven't necessarily seen the content, but if you'd like, and like I said, that would be a better form for you to ask this question.
Okay.
Okay.
yeah, I mean,
Fair.
yeah, I mean, Dapper's gonna have a bunch of different implementations. I think we have to figure out how it would look or how it would run on top of SF. Same thing with Ohm. They're interesting projects and we want to take advantage of them, but we need to figure out, kind of as Sadamba said, we're in the same sort of situation with SF that we are with Kube. These programming models and application models are, in the long term, we're hoping that they can target serverless environments where you don't have to care about the orchestrator or the infrastructure underneath them. The SF team is kind of sitting here thinking, well, we could do implementations of these things that target them natively at Service Fabric, and then people could use them. But if we do that, then you're getting programming models that look a lot like the programming models you already have, and you're not getting the serverless side of them. On Kube, the value proposition is a little different because you don't have programming models that are provided by the platform directly, and you don't have as much in the way of the application model. So I think they bring more value to Kube today. We have to figure out the relationship between these things and SF kind of going forward. As it is, we've used a lot of the learnings, not only from Kube, but from Service Fabric to kind of make these things. And now we have to figure out the relationships in the long term. But I think the future from our perspective is serverless. So something like if you want to use Ohm to describe your serverless application, and your serverless application is made up of Dapper agents that can talk to each other, then that's great. And that seems like a great future.
Thank you. But regarding the serverless future, I have several thoughts on this because I was doing a lot of thinking in this area, especially in terms of, I don't know, Virtual Kubelet, Atlas, and stuff like that. And one thing that is pretty much problematic to me is information security operating model for serverless platforms. What I mean that Kubernetes with not only Kubernetes, when you have control over the nodes, like in Service Fabric or Kubernetes today, then you can deploy Twistlock or Aqua Security and get the entire security layer, enforcement layer, network monitoring, network policies, all this stuff that is pretty advanced, including, I don't know, system call monitoring and stuff like that, which gives you additional security layer and control. If you go serverless, you are basically resigning today. You are basically resigning from the entire layer. And this is something I have really problem finding a good solution because we are basically depending what platform provider can offer us, right?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair concern. I mean, the future, maybe I should add an asterisk, right? I should say the future is serverless, asterisk, and then the asterisk is for most applications. And then there's going to be a whole set of environments where that serverless future doesn't work. So you're an on-prem deployment in a highly regulated industry and you require air-gap deployments of stuff. Well, then you can't use whatever serverless future we dream up in Azure. You've got specific compliance requirements that say that certain agents must be deployed on the host OS. Well, either those security compliance rules are going to have to change and evolve in order to take into consideration serverless environments, or we're going to need to be able to give you some level of control or maybe run in isolated environments so that those types of agents can continue to be deployed and do whatever it is that they do. I don't think that this story is fully baked yet, but one of the things that we do want to say is that, especially in the context of Service Fabric, serverless is just an option, right? The core SF product, this core SF product is still here, right? We have standalone, we have support for air-gapped environments, we have support for the core Service Fabric runtime deployed via the resource providers in Azure. This spectrum lets you continue to run in certain environments where maybe serverless isn't appropriate or where your requirements just aren't met by serverless yet. So it's kind of it's a spectrum, and deciding where you fit and what layer can actually meet your requirements is a fine thing to do. And if you find that the serverless future doesn't work yet for whatever reason, then these other environments remain available and are options that you can look at. Now, the downside of that usually, right, is you're back in the game of managing the infrastructure. You're back in the game of seeing all of the resources in Azure, for example. And so, we have this challenge on the product team as well. So one of the things that we've been doing a lot of is working to improve the relationship between SF in particular and other parts of Azure. So maybe instead of going to the VM scale set and saying, I would like to reboot this VM scale set, that command, instead of becoming an infrastructure level change that shows up and surprises the cluster, maybe that infrastructure can ask permission before that operation happens. Or maybe it goes through SF and SF orchestrates that change in a safe way. So these are ways of, yep, you still have all of the infrastructure available, you can still see it all, but we are taking more of it and automating the management of more of it on your behalf. So it's still in your subscription, you still have full control, but where we can, we've encapsulated or automated changes that you would make to that infrastructure. So, great low-hanging fruit and something that we're looking at is things like key rotation. Right, it'd be great if that was an automated thing because it's error prone and it serves no value other than rotating the keys.
Yeah.
Right. It's something that everybody has to do. So can we automate that? Can that be a policy that you have deployed into the Azure environment where that works on your behalf? Right. So we're going to kind of IaaS plus with an application platform on top, and so that might serve or at least help out reducing some of that management burden while still giving you access to the infrastructure. Now, that doesn't help anybody on-prem, right? But at that point, you're running your own servers, you're running your own VMs, and there's a bunch of other things that you have to take into consideration. So again, it's kind of a spectrum, and we're trying to make there be the minimum management overhead per environment. So the least management overhead would be the serverless world where you don't have to manage, say, the networking interconnects between the different services, and Azure and that environment take care of unwiring and rewiring private networks up, no problem. But if you have to step out of that environment because it doesn't have, compliance certification X yet, then you can still get most of the infrastructure kind of managed for you in common ways, even though you still have all of it like living in your subscription. So this is all stuff that we're working on, but we're trying to make that spectrum as smooth as possible, right? So that you only have to take on the minimum amount of work that you have opted into, rather than today, you feel like I have to take on all this management even though I only wanted this one extra feature to be accessible to me. So we're trying to smooth that out and make it easier, even if you're running in not a serverless, but I guess a server full environment where you can still see all of the separate resources. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this is a very fair approach, and you have been doing this entire spectrum thing very well for many years. Yes,
right. And that's what we're trying to do. We're continuing now that we've done from bare metal up to virtual machines, and then we did from virtual machines to serverless. But each of these is a pretty big jump, and so what we're trying to do now, particularly in the managed environment in Azure, we're trying to extend that management out a little bit so that common infrastructure operations are orchestrated or automated in a reasonable way for customers that need to live in that environment, right? Because either, you don't want to be on-prem, you don't have your own servers, and the serverless environment doesn't work for your workload for whatever reason. So we're still trying to offer that and expand the capabilities of that semi-managed, but still server-full environment. And so there is work going on there to have some of these channels and to automate more of these tasks.
I was just a bit scared with this, that serverless is the future, so yeah.
Yes, asterisk for most applications.
Yeah, okay. So if I can follow up with one last question, it's that when Dapr is out, we can see probably what is the direction of the service mesh. If I understand correctly, Dapr is going to replace service mesh because service mesh doesn't do a lot of value added and Dapr obviously does a lot of value added. Is this correct understanding? Is it like Dapr will replace the service mesh, or it's rather the SMI is going to be dropped, or SMI is still a thing?
So I want to be very clear, when you say service mesh, you don't mean service fabric mesh.
Yes, service mesh.
SMI spec service mesh in the open world. Okay, just making sure. I don't have a good insight on how that's going to play out. I think that there is certainly some interesting overlap. SMI spec and things like that have definitely focused on the core networking and communication part, where Dapr talks about communication, but is also focused on the actual programming models and code. So you're right that there's some overlap, but it's also not a 100% overlap. So I guess it would depend if you go into Dapr, right, and talk about, well, yeah, it's gRPC between these separate agents that are running in their separate spaces. That's a fine story, but it doesn't talk as much about how the networking is actually accomplished under the hood. Whereas SMI spec, depending upon which provider you pick there, you get different capabilities, sometimes wildly different capabilities. This might be another thing to take up in the Dapr conversation going forward. I don't know that there's been a clean understanding between the differences between these things at this time. But that's good feedback for the Dapr team.
What I have learned during last build, I think, is that Sean McKenna has, let's say, was not very positive towards service mesh. He was making like a pretty clear statement that service mesh is a dead end.
I mean, I'm not aware of that. That would be news to me. And unfortunately, Sean's on vacation right now, so I can't ping him and ask him what the heck he was talking about. As far as I know, the SMI spec thing is still a pretty big initiative. And it does solve that generic problem in kind of the kube space specifically. But I think both of these projects, are going to grow and evolve. And I don't know exactly how that's going to play out. I don't have any particular information on SMI's roadmap or what work is going on or anything like that. So unfortunately, I can't comment much more other than I see what you've identified, and I agree. There does seem to be some overlap between the work going on in Dapr and some of the SMI spec stuff, but I don't know how that's going to play out.
Okay, thank you very much.
Let's see. Greg has some questions.
Yeah, his questions are also associated with Dapr, but this one I think we can answer here.
Yeah, there's a couple in here.
Yeah, does Dapr have anything to do with Service Fabric?
Was that earlier?
No, this is,
Sorry, I joined late. I just saw the announcement yesterday and I was like, that sounds familiar.
Okay.
Here, actor, stateful, etc. It rings a bell.
So is there any association, or is it a completely new model? I'm sorry, I missed the first half of the meeting.
So you can think of it as a programming model that's abstracted from a given environment that combines some of the things that we've done in SF, some things that we have learned in talking with the functions team, and tries to offer a environment abstracted programming model for writing lots of little disconnected services.
Okay, I'll read
so,
more.
Yeah. It's I would say influenced by a bunch of things, right? You could squint at it and say it's part Orleans, it's part Service Fabric Actors, it's the Actions project that we talked about on this call a few times. It's Service Fabric Actors. It's some of the stuff from functions or durable functions. It's really attempting to bring together a bunch of things that a bunch of teams have been pursuing kind of in parallel, and make kind of one best of breed programming model that we're doing open in the community. In terms of relation to Service Fabric, we don't know yet. I talked a little bit earlier about how in the future we think that the Dapper programming model story and the Ohm application model story fit well in a serverless environment. In Service Fabric, we already have corollaries for some of these things. And so there aren't providers for these things today, but there might be if there was sufficient community interest to do so.
Right. Okay.
So-
I just sounds like it is what it is. I just didn't know if there's anything behind the scenes. I was just curious. It was more of a curious question.
No deep magic at this point.
Okay.
But a lot of
more
people talk,
important-
like we worked with a lot of the team, a lot of the same people who have worked on things like Service Fabric programming models, contributed a lot of ideas. And again, same for Ohm, where it's a conversation between Service Fabric application model teams and the AKS and upstream folks to try and build a model that captures some of the same capabilities that we've had in SF for some time and had in Kube for some time, but really tries to up-level the conversation so that in the future, when the future is serverless for most applications, you can still get some of these programming models and some of but I think it's early days and there's lots of work and discussion going on.
Okay. My other question on port conflicts was my immediate need.
Yeah. So if you have apps that have ports specified and they fall within the application port range, actually in recent versions of SF, we're going to emit a warning about that. In the future, we're going to block it entirely. So if we scan the manifest and we see that there's a port in there that is within the application port range, we will block deployment of that application. So you won't be able to even create it. So that's coming. It was called out as an upcoming breaking change, I think, in the last set of release notes, maybe the one before that.
Yeah.
Okay. So what we're seeing
in the
is
future, we're going to prevent this from happening entirely. In the meantime, I would update your manifest to get rid of those ports.
well, this
So
is
pick
a
different port outside the range, or adjust the range so that it does not include that port.
the problem is there's an app that picks a dynamic port,
Mhm.
and sometimes it picks one of SF's ports.
So that shouldn't
it's
be
a-
happening
it's a-
because when we deploy Service Fabric onto a machine, take the application port range that you've defined,
Yep.
and we carve it out of the operating system's dynamic port range. So just to offer a simple example, right? Let's say the dynamic port range on the operating system by default is 0 to 100, right?
I got you.
If you specify your application port range as 0 to 50,
Yep.
then if you ever go to the operating system and ask for a dynamic port, it will not give you a port in that. It'll only give you a port in the upper range that wasn't carved off for SF specifically.
Maybe Splunk is not asking for it from the operating system in that manner. I don't know, but Splunk took our ports and crashed our apps.
Fascinating. Okay, so
So
it might be
that's
that
our
it has
problem.
some internal hard-coded set that it knows is typically in the dynamic port range, but which it's not asking for from the OS, so the OS does not know that those are allocated.
Right.
Or it's asking for a particular port that happens to fall within the application port range, and then nobody knows that that's been allocated. As a curiosity, is Splunk getting deployed via SF, or is it just some other agent you have on the box?
It's another agent on the box.
Okay.
So it sounds like from what you're saying is that when you start the cluster up, it's going to grab that port range and tell the OS you can't use this. But what we see, my guess is that startup time is the issue here. And the Splunk agent is a very lightweight client that's just porting data out. And it probably starts up faster than Service Fabric, and it may have grabbed a port before Service Fabric locked it.
We say we allocate that port range at the time that the node is configured. So kind of is this in Azure or is this somewhere else?
No, this is on-prem and it's after a
Okay.
reboot. So it's after a reboot of the VM.
But if that VM is already set up as a Service Fabric node, it should already have that configuration applied.
Gotcha. So
But-
it's not done per startup. It's just a one-time configuration
Yeah.
on
yeah.
install of the node, right?
Yeah, because we're trying to prevent exactly this, which is something comes up later and steals it. Because we wouldn't necessarily be able to correct that. So I feel like maybe there's something in the Splunk config that you can use to
Okay.
change the port into something either outside the Service Fabric application port range to a specific known good port, 443 or something that's actually for whatever this purpose is, or tell Splunk to actually allocate from the dynamic range, and that should work.
Gotcha. Okay, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't a Service Fabric configuration I was missing. I don't own the Splunk app, so now I
Yeah.
have to interact with the team who does.
Yeah,
Cool.
as far as we know, I have not seen cases where well-behaved apps stole ports from the configured application port range. I have seen things that were hard-coded to use certain ports cause this conflict. We're going to move to a point where at least if that hard-coded port is defined for a thing you're deploying with SF, that we will block it from doing so. But if it's something that Service Fabric doesn't know about and isn't managing, that is just squatting on ports in that range, then your options are basically to change that thing so that it doesn't do that, or to change the port range that SF allocates so that this doesn't end up as a conflict.
I'd offer as an enhancement request there is, unless you're out of ports in that port range, go grab a different one. Who cares if there's something sitting on it, right?
Well,
Just
the
go use a
hard
different
part
one.
is that we don't know. So the OS thinks it's free, and we think it's free. So we would have to monitor the crash, determine that the port conflict was the cause of the crash, and then the next time that the application started, hand out a different port. It's not
Right,
undoable, but it
Right.
requires observing the failure mode and understanding it deeply. A lot of times the things that we get back from, it's a stack, and you'd have to find where in the stack that particular exit was. Or we'd have to have magic exit codes that indicated, this is the port conflict exit code. Try a different port.
Unfortunately,
so-
that's what I'm having to do is I'm having to set up monitors on the Windows event logs that get logged when there's port conflicts, and then have people come in and manually kill the Splunk process and kick it out.
Pretty goofy.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thanks. I don't want to take up everyone else's time. I appreciate
No,
it.
it's okay. Let's see.
One
We
question
did-
from my side. Did you try to configure the port range, ephemeral port ranges and stuff like that in Service Fabric settings? Because it gives you some control over the port ranges that are used.
Yeah. We have specific ranges that the cluster that we've said, hey, this is for the cluster, right? But Splunk doesn't seem to care.
Oh, okay. And you cannot control this for Splunk.
Well, now it's time to reach out. But before I went and told the other team, hey, you got to fix your stuff, I wanted to make sure I couldn't configure the cluster in a way. I wanted to ask y'all first. But yeah, the next step is now go and say, hey, Splunk's got to be told not to do this.
Or you configure SF and the OS to avoid whatever Splunk wants to squat on.
It's dynamic. So I can't really plan for it. It seems to say, hey, give me any open port, and it grabs it, but maybe it's using a different approach than asking the OS for that port. I don't know. I can ask at this point.
Okay, we're running out of time, so I want to answer a couple last questions here.
Okay.
So the getting started for Dapper, Marcin actually linked. Is there an integration scenario between Dapper and Durable Energies? I honestly don't know. That's a good question for the functions folks, and probably a good question for the Dapper meeting tomorrow if you can get into that. Should start the research page. Feel like the left doesn't know what the right side does. Maybe
Durable entities are useless if you have Actor model. So
that's certainly one opinion. We can figure out maybe Amanji, if you have more questions about the relationship between these things, we can follow up separately. Best ever. I mean, for Fabio, the question about events versus actual pub sub, it depends on exactly what your requirements are. If best effort events is good enough, then you can use events. If you require something more guarantee, like higher levels of guarantees, then you might need to look into a pub sub system like Service Bus or something like that. The last little question is on mesh. I don't think that we have a full story for what's going to happen to mesh yet. Clearly, a lot of the things that we did with Ohm, particularly, as Sudhanva mentioned, flowed out of the work that we had done for mesh, where you have this application model that is describes serverless things and can be deployed anywhere. So it might be that the Ohm model becomes the public surface for something like mesh. But I don't think we have that story fully baked out yet. I think we're going to see a little bit longer how it goes. In the meantime, we do still like feedback on mesh, and we do think that the future is serverless. So if you wanted to go in that direction and play around with it and continue to provide feedback, I think we'd be welcoming of that.
We're
Really out of time.
We're definitely out of time, but Fabio had, he said,
Oh,
is there a public?
the public version of SF is the same,
Yeah.
same bits. We actually experiment on a few internal partners first and then give them to you folks. So sometimes the bits that Microsoft uses are older and buggier than the ones that get rolled out publicly. So you're welcome. We experiment on ourselves a little bit.
The last one is just a FYI. It's not a question.
Oh, it's not a question from Greg. Okay, that's an FYI.
Yeah, he's just giving an.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, if that's the case, once again, thanks everyone. We made it just a little bit over the hour there, but
time back for those that started on the wrong call.
Yeah.
Apologies for that. We'll figure it out.
yeah, we'll get that figured out going forward. So thanks everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your days.
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Trying to ask a question.